Yes. While we're waiting for this to heat up, if you would please take out your social studies / science notebook, as you will be using it for your response today. You will need your notebook and a pencil. You do not need to open your notebooks quite yet. Just have them out and ready, please. Okay, we need to be ready and coming back in 3. Voices off in 2. Eyes on me in 1. Okay, so as we talked about, we are going to be doing an interactive read aloud of nonfiction for a content area, which means we've been studying the child labor that occurred during the Progressive Era. And we're going to be reading an article that talks about the breaker boys during the Progressive Era, and we'll learn what that means in just a second. So as we said, we've been learning about child labor in the Progressive Era for the last couple of days. Today we're going to read this nonfiction text that talks about injustices that these breaker boys had to go through. Remember, injustices mean that these boys are having to do things that at the age they were at, they should not have had to do. They were unjust situations. They were not fair. So we're going to be reading this text and listening for the injustices that we hear. While I'm reading, I would like you to think about some injustices or some not fair things that you hear during this chapter. So I'm going to start reading. Please actively listen while I'm reading. That means we're listening with our eyes, with our ears, and we're thinking about what you're listening to while I read. So Kids at Work by Lewis Hine. Lewis Hine took some of the most haunting photos in the dark tunnels and grimy breaker rooms of the nation's coal mines. In Pennsylvania, the biggest coal-producing state, thousands of 14 and 15-year-old boys were employed legally in the mines. At the same time, thousands of younger boys, some of them only 9 or 10, worked illegally. The state's child labor law was almost useless, since it required no binding proof of a worker's age. Boys worked in a variety of jobs, as mule drivers, couplers, runners, spraggers, and gate tenders. Most of the younger boys were employed in the coal breakers outside the mines. Their faces black with soot, they sat in rows on wooden boards placed over coal chutes. As coal came pouring through the chutes, the boys bent over, reached down, and picked out pieces of slate and stone that could not burn. They had to watch carefully since coal and slate looked so much alike. If a boy reached too far and slipped into the coal that was constantly flowing beneath him, he could be mangled or even killed. This is an example of an injustice that I have just heard. These younger boys who are between 9 and 15 years old are risking their lives to work in these coal mines. So that is one example of an injustice that I've heard so far. So we're going to continue to read. As I'm reading, keep thinking about those unfair, unjust situations that you hear. We're also going to be talking about a couple of vocab words as we read in the text. While I was there, said Hine, 2 breaker boys fell and were carried into the coal chute where they were smothered, he reported from a Pennsylvania mine. A foreman is a worker who supervises and directs the other workers, who's like their boss. A foreman, armed with a broom handle, stood in front of the breaker room. He watched the boys as intently as they watched the moving coal. He used the broom handle to rap or hit the heads and shoulders of those who, in his opinion, were not working hard enough. Hine wrote, the pieces rattled down through the long chutes at which the breaker boys sat. It's like sitting in a coal bin all day long, except that the coal is always moving and clattering and cutting their fingers. Sometimes the boys wear lamps in their caps to see through the thick dust. They bend over the chutes until their backs ache and they get tired and sick because they have to breathe coal dust instead of good, pure air. Many of the breaker boys suffer from chronic coughs. There are 20 boys in that breaker, one of the foremen said, and I bet you could shovel 50 pounds of coal dust out of their systems. When the boys turned 12, they began to work down in the mines. where there was always the threat of cave-ins and explosions. One of Hein's photos shows a trapper or a door boy sitting on a bench in front of a heavy wooden door. The picture was taken with a flash pan 500 feet down the mine shaft and 3/4 of a mile underground from there. It was this boy's job to open the door when the coal car came through and then to close the door quickly to keep the air from blowing through the mine and lowering the temperature. A lonely job, wrote Hein, all by himself, 9 or 10 hours a day in absolute darkness except for his little oil lamp. Owing to the intense darkness in the mine, I didn't notice the chalk paintings on the door until I had developed the photograph plate. These drawings tell the tale of the boy's loneliness underground. So here is a photo of that boy, and he has written all over the door, "To shut this door, that's your job, that's you." And all he does all day long is sit in the darkness for 9 to 10 hours a day. Can you imagine? The only proof of age required for mine workers in Pennsylvania and most other mining states was a statement signed by the boy's parents. And yet, court hearings revealed the true ages of those boys who became victims of mine disasters. One youngster, a lad named Patrick Kearney, lost his life in a mine accident in 1907. At an inquest or a look deeper into a situation in order to figure out the true facts. So that means they're digging deeper into a situation. At the inquest following his death, the foreman testified that the company had a certificate stating that Patrick was 14, even though he appeared to be only about 10. He was kind of a small boy, the foreman said, but I thought he might be older than he looked. In any case, since Patrick's parents had signed the work certificate, there was no need to question it. Afterward, Patrick's father was called to testify. He admitted that the boy had been born in June 1898, and was only 9 and a half when he died. His father had signed the certificate stating that Patrick was 14 because he wanted to get work for the boy. "It was very scary, believe me," said a veteran miner, recalling his childhood days in the mine. "Really, I don't know how in the world I got the nerve to go down there in the first place. You didn't dare say anything. You didn't dare quit either because it was something to have a job at 8 cents an hour." So they only made 8 cents an hour for doing that hard labor. So before reading, I asked you to think about some injustices that you heard throughout our text. Remember, we said unjust means not fair situations that these children were put through. And when I say go, I want you to turn and talk with an elbow partner or your table group and talk about some of the injustices that you heard. You may go on 1, 2, 3.
They only get 8 cents an hour. And they were like under. Yeah, that's not fair because they only get 8 cents an hour. Nicole could cut their fingers. They could. Yeah, because you could die easily from making a mistake. Like how that kid died. Yeah, if you could die and yeah, not fair because you really technically I know it's really fair that's not here. And then it makes
We've got 15 more seconds left.
If you don't work hard enough, you get beaten.
Wait, is it just on this page? Oh, that
the whole thing.
Coming back in 3.
that they need to amend.
Voices up in 2. Eyes on me in 1. Now that you've shared some ideas with your partner and you've listened to the injustices through our text today, I would like you to write and explain 2 unjust situations that you heard in our text today and explain why you think they are unjust or not fair. I will give you 2 minutes to do this. Your 2-minute timer starts now. more minute left, a little less. Seconds left. Okay, showing your fingers. Raise your fingers to tell me if you need 1 more minute. I still see lots of friends writing. I see between 0 and 2 minutes left. Let's take about 1 more minute to finish up. If you have written down your 2 ideas already that are unjust, you can go into a little bit more detail in your explanation of why they are unjust. Coming back in 3, 2, 1. I need you to make sure that you have your name at the top of this paper. I would like you to gently tear this paper out of your notebook. And then when I call your table number, I'd like you to come on up and place this paper in the social studies turn-in bin. And then take a seat back down at your table spot, please. And call your table.
I just feel like this mine looks.
Thank you, table 1, for sitting so quietly. You may be dismissed to put your papers back in the turn-in bin. If you have the raw edges, that's okay. You can just tear it out. If you are at table 3, thanks for sitting so quietly. You may be dismissed to place your papers in the social studies turn-in bin. If you are at table 4, you may go. Table 2, you may go. Okay, just so you guys know as well, we will be reading the same text tomorrow for another purpose. We will be reading and talking about the text structure that the author has written this piece of work in. And so we'll be using the same text to analyze a little deeper and to think about the text structure that the author uses or the format in which the paper is written to get across the information to his audience. Okay, so we are about to move into win time. During win time today, I've got your work on writing grammar sheets that you were given earlier.